Good morning, everyone. Nathan Drive, and we'll start today's session. The first talk is titled Taking Responsibility for OSM Data by Daniel Kastl, Georepublic. Thank you for coming, and welcome, everyone. Are you ready? Oh, okay. Yeah. Daniel? Okay, let's start.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Kastl, and there's one topic about OpenStreetMap that I wanted to talk about. Usually I talk about Japanese addresses, but I'm now in Japan, so it's maybe not interesting for the Japanese audience. And so everything I talk about today is personal view and maybe from a Japanese perspective, because I work here and I live here. So a few words what I'm doing. I'm actually a geographer, and I started mapping with OpenStreetMap as a hobby, and I do software development. Okay, I do software development, and during that time I became the maintainer of the PG routing project, which is an extension of PostGIS and PostgreSQL, and you can do things like shortest path search, drive time analysis, and some other network analysis queries in the database. And then I founded my own company to be able to stay in Japan and live in Japan, but also stay some weeks or a month or two in Germany from time to time, especially in summer when it's so hot here. And since 2007, I enjoy already OpenStreetMap in Japan. So when you're a foreigner in Japan, then usually the first question is, are you English teacher? And then you say, no, I'm German. And then they say, oh, if you're German, and there's a very positive reaction, don't we have something in common? So aren't we very similar? And then I just hope it's not because of our history. So we have some years that are kind of like not really good to, not really we can be proud of. And so I try to turn it into something positive, and I think Germans are very good in OpenStreetMap. So if we are very similar, maybe Japanese can be also very good in OpenStreetMap. And yeah, this was the mapping activity in 2008. So when OpenStreetMap kind of started in Japan. And in Germany, it was already very active. And I thought, well, 127 million Japanese people, there should be a few that join the community. And also in Japan, people love maps, they need maps. I think it's a country where maps are very important to actually find a location. And you can have everything from cute maps to cool maps to very simple and very sophisticated and beautiful maps. So people, also children are familiar with reading maps, and this is the sightseeing map of Aizu Wakamatsu. And so I thought, yeah, OpenStreetMap and Japan, that's a perfect fit. And the next thing is, everybody here likes technology. You probably found out already. So this is a mapping party of 5 or 6 people. So in average, everybody has 3 devices. And so, yeah, perfect conditions. The problem in Japan is that this is the view from the mountains of Kobe to Osaka Bay. There are very, very huge, large cities. So there's a lot to map. You think, okay, let's start, but when you start, it's really just small pieces, and yeah, you can't do that alone. I think it was very helpful that there was government data that was freely available, and there was a permission to import it into OpenStreetMap. So especially administrative districts, airport data, coastlines, like harbor, some facilities of larger scale could be imported, and so this was, I think, quite helpful to get at least something onto the map. Also rivers, for example, or railways. So railway I found very helpful. And yeah, because we talk about responsibilities, I want to start with the easiest one, the mapper's responsibility. So as a mapper, you are responsible to contribute reasonable, good data. So something that is not wrong. And so when I started mapping here, yeah, this is 2007 on the left, and today on the right. So there was just nothing. It was just a gray map. And you have kind of old devices. You don't know really, you don't know where you start. You collect data, and you're sitting in a car or in a bus, and you get a long GPS track. And when you want to import it, you just don't know it's correct or not. And so I felt very happy when my road that I tracked was on the right side of the railway. So it was just not clear if the quality of GPS traces I have, if this is sufficient to produce a map that is useful for everyone. And at this time, it was also that you had to wait 1 week until you could see the result rendered on the main map. So when you made some edit, it took quite some time to see an update. And so I started mapping the area around me, like many people start. You get addicted, and it's a lot of fun. Everything around you is growing, and it looks like you are doing it right. So yeah, it's probably if you are one of the people who start with a gray area, it's in the beginning you don't know you are right or not, but it's also nice to see that you could produce something useful. And so I thought OSM is relatively easy to join. So maybe some people will disagree that the tools are not good enough or too difficult to use, or there are not many people or many people sign up, but later they don't make any edit. But I think it's relatively easy to join if you have this motivation, and it's compared to open source projects and Wikipedia, it's actually quite easy to contribute. So for Wikipedia, you really need to have a specialized knowledge, and if you want to contribute open source software, you need to really know about how to write source code and how to make something useful. So for OpenStreetMap, all you need to know is local knowledge. And actually, that's what everybody has. So you always know better about the area around you than somebody else who lives more far away. And yeah, there's a community. So so the community expects that you collect the data with care, but there are mapping parties, and usually they are friendly. So maybe I was lucky. I also heard that when you do something wrong, you get bad mails, or you also have bots that maybe revert your changes. But I was lucky, I never had this problem. So I think being a mapper is relatively easy, and yeah, all you have to care about is producing data that is good. And then, from the user perspective, I think OSM is really great as sample data. So when you use OpenStreetMap data for demos and workshops and these kind of things, I think it was very, very helpful for many projects, because you have free access to accurate and up-to-date data, and the data is not only available for a certain area, like I remember for the PG routing project, when I downloaded NAVTEC data that was free. First you have to sign up and get an email, an invitation, and you download it, and then it's for North America. So it's not really helpful to make a demo with North American data if you want to show this to somebody in Japan. And because OSM data is available everywhere, this is very, very good for sample data. And there's no fee to purchase a license or something, and you have full control over the data. So it's not only the map tiles, you can do routing, you can do data analysis, you can do whatever you want. And so when you produce something like a workshop or a demo, you can also share. You can share this together with the data, so people, everybody can use it freely. And that's why, like, OS GeoLive DVD or USB stick contains always every year an extract of OpenStreetMap data of the area where the Phosphor-G takes place. And this data is used by many sample applications, or you can use it when you play around with open source software. So this is very, very useful. And I'm not sure what kind of sample data would be included on this live distribution if OpenStreetMap would not exist. Or for my workshop that exists since 2007, having OpenStreetMap data was probably the reason why this workshop was so convenient to maintain. So also everyone can use this workshop and just use their data from their hometown. And I think you can find many mashups and demos and examples, and they all use OSM tiles. So just imagine OpenStreetMap would not exist. What would they use? Would they use all Google Maps? So if you are a user for, like, if you use sample data, if you use sample data, your responsibility is low. You have a lot of freedom, and you just have to comply with the license. You can't mix the data. So at some point, hobby turned into work. So I thought, how can I use OpenStreetMap for commercial projects? And so when I founded my company, so we do a lot of, like, location technologies, and so we use exclusively open source software, and we promote open data and open government, and we are active in multiple countries. So OpenStreetMap is the perfect data for us, because we don't have to search for different data sources in every country. And also, lots of open source projects, like I said before, they work very well with OpenStreetMap. So there are import tools, there are converters, there are recipes if you're looking for problems, if you have questions. There are many, many recipes how to solve a problem, and used is always OpenStreetMap data. Like the sample data as well, OSM fits very well with Phosphor-G software, the coverage, the license, and it's not only limited to streets. Like, there's a lot more data around, and it just feels good. So it feels much better than using proprietary data. And very often also, you can put in some whatever you want here. Proprietary maps don't really work for us. So either they are not compatible with tiling standards, for example, or they are too expensive, or they are not available in the area we need it, or we can't do with the data what we want to do. So it looks like, OpenStreetMap is the perfect choice. I mean, like yesterday in one talk, it was already mentioned, if you look in Japan, some areas in countryside, they're like the Zenrin Google Maps data is by far not as good as OpenStreetMap. So in Japan, like urban areas in Google Maps are very, very detailed and of very high quality. But if you go countryside, the situation is totally different. And OpenStreetMap is sometimes much, much better. That's also close to here. So you could ask why not using OpenStreetMap? But there's just one problem that I usually have when I use OpenStreetMap for commercial projects. And this problem is when I propose OpenStreetMap to a customer or using it in a service, then I take on responsibility for the data. And this is kind of strange because when I use proprietary data, like would it be, I don't know, Navteq doesn't exist anymore, or Teleatlas, or whatever, TomTom, or here in Japan, Zenrin. If something is wrong with the data, we just say, oh, sorry, to the customer. It's not our problem if the data is wrong. But if OpenStreetMap data is wrong, well, what should you say? Would you say, oh, the mappers are bad? Or you could say, yeah, I can fix it. No? So you can change it, but you kind of feel responsible for what you are doing. And you can't blame the community for not doing it good enough. And so, yeah, I find it kind of, so I feel responsible for the data when I use it. So, and in Japan, there are unfortunately some issues. So I sometimes say, why I don't have more projects in Germany? Because in Germany, it's so easy decision to use OpenStreetMap. But in Japan, we have a couple of troubles. And one is that there's a large spread of data coverage and quality within Japan. So there are areas that are very well mapped and very well maintained. And some are, they look okay, but it was data import. And when you look into details, maybe it renders nicely as a map, but it doesn't work well for routing or network analysis. Then I feel there's insufficient data about addresses and POI data. So addresses in Japan work quite different than what you are used to with streets. So in Japan, streets have no names. So everything is kind of block and polygon based. And blocks are usually not mapped, because sometimes you don't even know where the block is. And so you can hardly map an address without really going to this house and checking it. So yeah, also POI data, it's very important to have this information. It's not only the network data that was partly imported. And then one issue with cities, like when you probably saw Tokyo, and this is not only a 2D city, this is a 3D city. Just imagine how many shops and how many small, like how many facilities you have in one skyscraper. And you have very vertical and dense urban areas that I find very, very difficult to map. So not only for somebody who has some experience with mapping. And yeah, also the use of data beyond rendering map images. So map images hide a lot of incorrect data, like if streets are not snapped or not connected, or yeah, so you don't see everything. But I mainly use it for network analysis and routing and these kind of things. And then yeah, I feel that using OpenStreetMap bears some additional risk. So if I use this, I kind of have to guarantee that the data works. And I can guarantee this maybe for small areas I know, but I just don't know everywhere. So another problem is that most of our clients choose OSM because they want to save costs. So of course, if the data quality needs to be checked, and if you have to improve the data, and if you have to maintain the data well, this costs money. But usually, the reason to use OSM for many is that it's free of charge. And this combination of actually not having the money to carefully process the data makes it even more risky. Or because they just use it because there's no alternative. So sometimes if you want to have an offline map in Japan, you don't really have alternatives. So I find it very often much easier not to use OpenStreetMap in a commercial project. And this is actually something I would like to avoid, but the reality is that I'm using it very, very rarely. So yeah, what we can do. So one thing that I find interesting is that we think everybody knows OpenStreetMap, but that's not true. So the communities I'm here, so everybody here knows OpenStreetMap, of course, but just looking in like my friends or relatives, actually most people don't know OpenStreetMap. And the teachers of my daughter, they don't know OpenStreetMap. And in the kindergarten, nobody knows OpenStreetMap. And I just thought everybody knows it. It's not like Wikipedia. Kind of, Wikipedia everybody knows, but OpenStreetMap, I think we all assume that everybody knows it, but it's still a minority. And spreading the message and lobbying more and make it more public will probably help that people understand that is a community project and that is not only a free alternative to commercial map providers. And also lobbying for the idea of open data. So a lot of customers, a lot of, like if it's government or they don't value open data. For them, open data is usually just cheaper. And so I hope that at some point, so the message arrives and they will choose OpenStreetMap not for the reason that it's open data. And so that they know that the data isn't perfect and that they don't blame the companies providing the services. And I think it's also important that the generation of mappers, like education at school, that we kind of, the children don't, when you have data alternatives.
You said one of the reasons that companies use OSM data is because of cost, right, to reduce costs. If they're providing a service, how does that compare to like processing or serving infrastructure that they're going to require to provide themselves? Sorry, so if I use OSM data to reduce my costs, do I end up having to spend money on infrastructure to either process the data or to serve the data to my users?
Yeah, I think, so I'm not sure exactly, so I'm talking to the Japanese, it's mainly there's no alternative or free of charge, saving costs.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Just thank you very much, Daniel. The next session will start 10 o'clock. This.
Do you want me to wait until 10? 6 minutes? now that I have the room and a few people in it, maybe now is a good time to put my OpenStreetMap Foundation hat on and ask you to become members of the foundation if you're not already that. A good reason to do so is that you can vote for the next OpenStreetMap Foundation board. There's a lot of things that you can do, and this is not part of my presentation. I'm purely kind of having my OpenStreetMap Foundation hat on now. I'm on the OpenStreetMap Foundation board because of people like you. You voted for me, and I appreciate that. But the more people that are members, the better we have representation of our very diverse and broad group of OpenStreetMap contributors and enthusiasts. So if you're not a member already, I would strongly encourage you to sign up at our table. Dorothea, our assistant, is there to help you with that. And I would very much appreciate it. We have millions of people signed up for OpenStreetMap accounts, but only a few hundred of them are OpenStreetMap Foundation members, and I would very much like to see that increase and to be for a larger number of people to become members. And another thing, there's a lot of stuff you can do without becoming a member, of course. There's all the working groups that do such a lot of useful work, and a lot of people who are in working groups are in this room and at this conference. So if you want to get involved with engineering, with operations, with data, with communications, with membership, all those things need help. And all of these things are run by volunteers. And it would be fantastic if we could get more volunteers. And as a board, later this year, we'll start a volunteer drive to get more people to kind of go beyond just mapping, right? Everybody here in this room probably has mapped a little bit, maybe a lot. But there's so much else you can do for OpenStreetMap for the project. So if you want to step up and even spend like a few hours a month, or maybe even a few hours one time, our plan is to make it easy to find something to do. So look out later this year for a volunteer drive where you can look for things to do and be paired with people who can help you be useful in a different way to the project. So yeah, those are a few words from me as a foundation board member. And in a couple minutes, I'll resume my MapRoulette talk. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, it's a time 10 o'clock. Let's start next session. The title MapRoulette, 1 million collections and beyond, by Martijn van Exel.
Thank you. You can see that the title is already a little bit different. I promise I will be talking about MapRoulette a little bit also, but there's a few other things I want to talk with you about today. It's about helping each other, and it's about railroad crossings. I'm a railroad geek a little bit, and I love Japan for that reason alone, for many other reasons. And I want to also take a moment to thank the organizers of this wonderful conference for putting up a magnificent event. So thanks. If you want to follow along, this is on Google Slides, so you can see the presentation there. I'll repeat that link at the end of the talk. Before we dive in, I want to kind of take a little detour, talk about personal space. Personal space is kind of what, when you start to feel uncomfortable and sometimes someone gets too close to you. It's a little different for everyone, and it depends a lot on which culture you're from. But every person has this sense of personal space, and it depends on like who you're talking to. If it's someone you're intimate with, and you let them very close to you. If it's someone you've never seen before, it will be a few feet or maybe 1.5 meters that you feel comfortable being close to this person. And this is a very well researched topic in psychology, and you'll have noticed it if you've traveled here on a train or an airplane, that you feel slightly uncomfortable. People are a little bit too close for your comfort, really, because you don't know usually these people that you're traveling with. This picture really shows a better era in air travel when people had actually a good amount of room, but that's no longer the case. So what if we take that concept and apply it to mapping, right? What if we had each had our own personal mapping space? When I joined OpenStreetMap back in 2007, that would have meant that I would probably have about 7,000 square kilometers of space to map for myself. And that's a lot. That's just kind of taking some assumptions of inhabitable land and the amount of active users we had then. My user ID is 8,900, so there were about 8,900 other mappers before me. And that's how I come to that 7,000. Just a moment. If you take that now, it would still be for every active mapper, about 70 square kilometers of inhabitable space that we would have to cover, each of us. I don't know how many square miles that is, but I think we work with the metric system in this lovely country. So it doesn't quite work that way, though. OpenStreetMap, we work together. We don't each have our own personal mapping space. And I think very few people would really want that. It is a collaborative project, and we want to work together to make this the best map of the world. So we really want to map all the things together. And I think that's a lovely thing, and it still works that way. And I think we can still make that work. So those lines are really very blurry. That doesn't say that we don't have our own space at all. Like, we all live somewhere, we all work somewhere, we all have places that we know very well and that we can map from our own memory, or we bike or we walk or we drive there every day, so we see all the things that change. And I think Daniel's point was interesting, that he talks about responsibility, and you take responsibility for your area. And I think that's a good thing, but it also should not mean that no one else can encroach on that space and that no one else can map where you are. So if we really want to get to that point where we map all the things together, there's a few things that help a lot doing that. The first thing is, of course, lots of mappers. And we have that. We have, I lost count, but I think a little over 4 million registered users. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not far off, I think. This chart just shows something a little bit more of a harsh reality, though, which is the amount of, the percentage of users who have been contributing in the last month, which has been hovering around 1% over the past year or so, couple of years. And it's been declining. It's not declining anymore, but it's been declining since 2007. So as a project, we have problems keeping people mapping. And I think if you saw Harry's talk yesterday, he talked a little bit about his long tail diagram, where he's talking about how the map, how we have lots of people signing up, but we have to make them take all these jumps, like to make their first map, to make their first contribution, to keep mapping, to keep mapping a lot. And each jump that you have to make, a fewer people make it. And this is another way that shows. So the other thing we need to map all the things together that would help us a lot is technology. And I'm showing here the project for the company I work for, Telenav, is Improve OSM, that detects missing roads from lots of GPS data and lets you map them, as you can see here, trace them. Even in areas where the aerial imagery might be a little bit blurry, but because of the GPS, they prove that there have been people driving there, so there must be a road there. And I also highly encourage you to stick around for the talk after this, where Drishtie is going to talk about some approaches that Facebook has taken to detect things from imagery and help us map things much faster. I think the last thing that would help us very much to map the world together is direction. And what I mean by that is, I think we have a lot of, well, I don't know, we might have a lot of bored mappers, people who have exhausted their personal space and they don't really know where to help, what to do next, and maybe don't feel comfortable mapping somewhere else. And that direction comes in the form of tools. We have Tasking Manager from the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. We have OSM notes that you can check for things that people ask about. And we have MapRoulette, for example, and that was the reason I'm standing here, that I want to talk a little bit about. And I'll get to MapRoulette, and I think I'll have actually a little bit of time to actually talk about that project. But I want to just first talk about like what do we need to make things like MapRoulette and Tasking Manager work. And again, I think there's three important things. First one is trust. We have to actually trust each other. We have to trust people to come into our personal space and help us map there. And a lot of areas in the world, there's no one there yet, so it makes it easy. There's just like you're the first one to help help build the map there. But in other areas, and a lot of the areas where MapRoulette is active, there's already people mapping, and they might feel very strongly about their personal mapping space. But we have to trust each other. We all have good intentions. We all want to make the map better. We all make mistakes, and we have to work together to help each other make less mistakes and be encouraging and assume good intentions. The other thing that tools like MapRoulette are dependent upon is data, and especially street-level data from OpenStreetCam, Mapillary, satellite data and aerial imagery from the well-known sources that we have all relied on for many years. And those have not always been around. I mean, when I started mapping with OpenStreetMap in the Netherlands, all we had was Yahoo imagery that had a resolution of 30 meters, so there was nothing you can glean from that. So all we could do was go out and with our GPS devices and actually record traces. And there was no way to otherwise verify that streets were there. So, but that data is now all available to us, so we can go there and map in strange places. And then finally, of course, we need those tools to be available. There's a few that I already mentioned. There's MapRoulette, there's OSM notes, there's the Tasking Manager, there's 2Fix, which is very similar to MapRoulette. There's a whole landscape of tools. There's QA tools like KeepRight. There's a bunch of others. There's a whole page on the OSM wiki about just tools that let you check for things or help each other. I like to call them help tools. I don't like the word QA tools very much. Some of them are really QA tools that just point out all the errors in the map and say like, well, why don't you go fix these? I think that's a negative attitude, and I think MapRoulette is there to make it a little bit more positive. It's almost like a game, and I'll get to how it works for those of you who have not seen MapRoulette before. Okay, so there's quite a few. I have a few slides that cover it some. So yeah, help tools. Tools that are designed to help each other and help each other make the map better. So here's this is MapRoulette, what it looks like currently. It's an OSM map with something that's pointed out, and that's something, there's a question about that thing. And the question is in that little box there. In this case, someone has made what we call a challenge, and the challenge is to bring the number of stars that this hotel has in alignment with the convention. So please help me and fix this hotel so it has stars 1 to 5 or whatever the standard is. And you could be anywhere, right? This happens to be in Mexico. And then you go into JAWSA more ID and help fix this issue. And once you've done so with the help of the internet or aerial imagery or whatever you need to fix it that is valid, you go back to MapRoulette, and then you get served the next task. And this one happens to be in Japan, and it could be anywhere, and that's the roulette part about it. You get to fix and map things all over the world, and I think that's the beauty, that you get to help everyone, really. And you get to repeat that as many times as you want. So that's also the roulette part about it. It's random, and you can just keep doing these fairly simple tasks. So I promised you something about railroad crossings. I am a little bit of a rail geek. One of the challenges that we did in the United States with OSM community member Mike N, he's a railroad geek too, and he was worried that OSM didn't have nearly all the railroad crossings. Our Federal Railroad Administration says that there's more than 200,000 of them. And more than 200 people get killed every year crossing these things, either in their cars or the engineer. And more than 3,000 people get hurt. And all those deaths and injuries are preventable because it's usually people just not paying attention. And if they had good locations of where all these things are and good information about like what kind of features this railroad crossing has, we could help prevent some of these accidents with OpenStreetMap. So he made this challenge. This is how that other countries notice that this is dangerous too. Like lots of countries are working to bring the number of railroad crossings, level crossings, down. This is Germany. In 10 years, that number has gone down from 22 to say 17,000. So it's a problem that is worldwide, but we happen to try and solve it in the US. So this is where all those things are. There's a lot of them. There's more than 200,000 of them. We've fixed or added or corrected 70,000 of them in 10 months with more than 250 people participating. And I think that really speaks to the power of MapRoulette. It's not that many people, really, 250, but they really get active and keep going to fix these problems. And it's really quite addictive once you get started. So that's kind of a real-world problem that MapRoulette has managed to help solve. And now we're talking to the Federal Railroad Administration to see, like, how can we help you with this data? And they're very interested, and they're also very interested to use MapRoulette themselves to have people, maybe the general public, or maybe just their employees or government people, use MapRoulette to solve more of their problems, because in the US, the government is always horribly underfunded, so there's all the data that they have is out of date, incomplete, so whatever help they can get, when I tell them about MapRoulette, it's like, oh, this is free labor, basically, so we can help make our data better. So they're very excited about this. MapRoulette overall, we fixed about 1.2 million things since 2012 when we first started doing something like MapRoulette. So that's a lot of things that in OpenStreetMap we helped fix. Currently we have over 1,000 users, and we fixed 2,000 to 5,000 tasks per week. I'm saying we, but what I mean is, of course, is you. That's quite a lot, really. It encourages people to also make their own challenges, which is something anyone can do. And if you're interested in learning how to do that, then you should come see me later, and I can help you do that. A few months ago, I started asking. I did a little questionnaire to ask you how you were feeling about MapRoulette. I got 85 responses, which I found pretty encouraging. Maybe some of you filled this out. And people were, on average, fairly positive. the main thing that people were not so positive about is, and that came up in the comments also, people cannot easily find the challenge that they want to work on. There's a lot of information, but it's hard to find something that gets you interested. Most people who responded have actually used MapRoulette quite a lot, or so they say. But most of them have not tried yet tried to create a challenge of their own. And it's actually quite easy to do if you have used Overpass before. Then you are almost halfway there already. So that's a fairly positive outlook. I mean, again, the main things that people were critical about was really that they found it hard to find something to do, and we're thinking about ways to make that easier. So where do we go from here with MapRoulette? I want to save this. In the immediate term, like the top features that I think people want from just talking to people and looking at these questionnaire results is people want to find it, have an easier job finding new things to do and finding interesting things to do based on where they are, based on their interests, based on whatever, based on tags, based on types of roads or types of features. So plan is to make that much easier. The other thing that I've been wanting to do for a long time is to be able to solve things in one click. So you could preload, you could suggest a fix, for example. So if you already know the answer and you just want confirmation, so right now you need to go into JOSM, edit, and upload, and go back to MapRoulette. But what you could also do is, if you already know what the fix should be, but you want humans to look at each problem, you could use MapRoulette as sort of a manual import or manual fix tool based on answers that you already have. And that might make an import much more palatable to a lot of people. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about adding or improving. But in the end, though, I already mentioned that there's a lot of tools out there, and they all have their own database, and they all have their own set of problems. What would be really neat, and this is really something aspirational, I haven't worked on this at all, but I just want to kind of throw it out there, that something that would be really nice to have would be like a universal help layer in OSM that anyone can add things to, and tools like MapRoulette can query it and read from it and say, like, so we have one layer, maybe even in the OSM database. Maybe it's just what is currently OSM nodes, and we just need to expand that a little bit and have one layer of challenges, of things that you can help with, a help layer, like not a QA layer or something negative like that. I like the word help because it really speaks to the collaborative nature of OSM. So yeah, that's something to think about, and I'm thinking about it. Maybe we can talk about it a little later if you're interested in helping solve that problem. So I mentioned the questionnaire. This is sort of an epilogue. The talk is over, but one of the things I promised in that questionnaire is I would give a prize, a random Mappy prize, to one of the people who took time out of their day to fill out this questionnaire. And this is where 1985 comes in, when a small company, a startup called eTech, released their a navigation system that worked without GPS because it wasn't available back then, purely on inertia. And this is what it looked like. And the maps were loaded on cassettes. So you would need to load. You would need to wait 10, 15 minutes for the map to load into your device before you started driving in an area. And the prize is 2 of these cassettes with maps on them. The system is not included, but if you're, this is kind of OpenStreetMap from the 1980s. It's not open, but I mean, you can open them and see if you can load it. I don't have the system to go with it, but if you can find one on eBay and you're MacGyver, then you can make these work and you can have maps. So I drew a random winner, and that's them. I don't know who it is. I didn't collect names. I just collected email addresses. If that person is in the room, go and get him. And otherwise, I will get in touch with them over email and get them their prize. That's it for me. And that's MapRoulette. I hope you use it, and I hope you help improve it. And I'm here to answer any and all questions that you have. Thanks. I don't know why such a sad ending.
Are there any questions?
So with MapRoulette, how did you ever? I mean, you have a lot of tasks to do, right? So how many percent, or how many percent do you sometimes reach that are done, or how many are left over? How many tasks?
That's a great question. How many tasks are left over? A lot. The main reason for that is that people, it's now easy enough to make challenges that people make challenges that have tens of thousands of tasks, but are not necessarily easy to solve. Like the key property of a MapRoulette challenge is that it needs to be somewhat addictive, so it needs to be easy. You need to be able to solve it quickly. You don't need local knowledge, and it needs to be easy to understand. And some people who try it for the first time, they have this idea, but it turns out to be a little harder than they thought, and maybe it didn't work so well. But then the tasks are all still there. So right now, I think we're at a fix rate of about, I think, 15 to 20% of all the tasks that are in there. There's more than 1 million things in there to fix, but not all of them are easy or even doable. So there's a lot of people kind of trying stuff out that ends up kind of being in the database and not working very well. And the one thing I really want is, and if anyone is interested, like challenge maintainers, right? People who help me, because I'm pretty much the only one doing it right now, help me have admin access to the database and help. Maybe I should just give everyone that, really. Why not? It's a good idea that you gave me. Anyone can just help figure out which challenges are good, which challenges are not so good, and then those things could just disappear. But right now, yeah, the fix rate is pretty low. There's more than 1 million things, and we're, I think, about 15%.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments?
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Next session will start at 10:30. Okay, let's start. The next session is titled AI-Assisted Road Tracing for OpenStreetMap by Ms. Drishtie Patel and Ming Gao from Facebook. Welcome.
Cool. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Awesome. So I'm Drishtie Patel. Ming Gao could not come. He's actually one of our engineers in Boston and has an intern currently that's finishing up, and so he didn't want to leave him in the last week because it's like a really important week for interns. And so I am here on behalf of both of us. I'm also joined by Pierre Roux, which very conveniently is wearing a Facebook t-shirt, so if you want to ask any questions, he's available as well. So firstly, thank you for having us and letting us speak. I've been to a lot of State of the Map US's, but this is my first international one, so I'm really excited to be here. And I wanted to take this time to talk about a lot of the work that's been happening with Facebook. I know it's come up in a few different talks, and there's been a couple of discussion posts about it, but I'm going to try and go through this presentation as quickly as possible, and so we have more time for questions, and I really hope that we get some questions, because if there's anything we can clarify, this is a good time, but you can always get me after as well. So as we know, and you can see by the talk, that Facebook is using OSM, and kind of wanted to tell you a little bit about why and how we use OSM to make things very clear. One of the things that we've seen is that maps have played a very interesting role in Facebook, and we've actually seen engagement of people increase when they have a map to look at. And if you weren't already aware, we use maps in check-in, places, pages, and standalone apps like Messenger and Instagram. We've started using Facebook in a few of our countries, where in fact we noticed we started using OSM in a few of our countries for Facebook, where we found that OSM quality and coverage was actually better than some of the traditional map providers. And that seems to be a common theme, and we've heard it in a lot of different talks over the last few days. And that's because of the power of community, which is pretty cool. So why do we care about OSM at Facebook? So the mission at Facebook is to make the world more open and connected. And we found that 10% of the world's population actually lives in places where there's no connectivity. And so this could be internet connectivity, places without power, and basic resources as well. And we really do think that it's responsibility of everyone to increase that coverage across the world. And we've heard from a lot of really cool tech companies working on great things using map data. But what we've learned over the last few years, and what a lot of people are seeing, is that there's really big areas of the map that actually have no coverage at all, right? And so there's no road coverage. It kind of looks like nobody lives there. And so at Facebook, our mission is to basically increase that coverage. And especially within our connectivity labs, where there's a lot of projects focused on connectivity, basically trying to understand the populations that live out there, who lives out there, how many people, getting better data for those areas has been really integral. And that was our mission for OSM. The other thing, and I know Doug mentioned, was that a lot of companies use OSM because it's at a great price point, right, which is $0. But the other thing that's pretty amazing with OSM is the ability to customize and style and move really fast. And I heard that phrase a lot when I was in my previous job at the humanitarian sector, of like, tech moves really fast, and there's all these really great phrases. But I didn't actually understand what that meant until I moved to Facebook. And things really do move fast. So when people want to build a tool, they'll get engineers together, and before you know it, a week later, you have a prototype, and they're testing it. And something we've seen over and over again is that map providers are really great in the more traditional sense, have great coverage, but sometimes just can't move as fast as we'd like to. And this is an example of live maps. Has everyone kind of seen live videos on Facebook? Somewhat. Okay, I see some hands. So this was a team that was focused on basically trying to figure out where videos are happening and kind of give users the ability to see what's going on around them visually. So it was a group of engineers that have no map experience, and were looking into data, and they came across OSM and realized that they could build this in a week. So it's something they were able to use the data, style it, customize it, make it work with the current infrastructure that they had for live videos, and get this out in a week, which is pretty amazing. If you think about more traditional ways we would have done that, going through kind of the longer process, it could have taken us 3 or 4 months. And just so that ability to customize and style things very quickly was what was compelling to Facebook. The other thing is that I touched on a little bit in the last slide is coverage. And we've seen a lot of these slides. I know Arun showed one recently about coverage of how many roads they are. And we did something very similar as well. And you can see a lot of the world is just not there. It's empty. And this is where I think we could use the help of technology. On my last job, I was at the Red Cross, and we did a lot of manual editing. So crowdsourcing data, people mapping on satellite imagery before you could go onto the ground and actually walk door to door with GPS data and collect it. It is very manual, and it's not the easiest thing to do. You spend 3 or 4 months prepping to be in a country, training local data. A lot of the places that we're talking about and looking about in remote areas don't have basic necessities. So you're not looking at places that have easy Wi-Fi and power and access. And so it's really important to have that help in those areas to even jumpstart a community. Because going into a random small town in the middle of Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, telling them about OSM is great, but then if they have no way to continue and even make a username because there's not that great Wi-Fi, it starts to get a little hard to build a community, which is why I think there's got to be a couple of things that change in the way we work. And remote tracing has been really great. It's super awesome. But as you can see, the engagement for it doesn't continue staying. It's really hard to get someone to continue going into a remote area and just draw roads upon roads upon roads. And so the idea came from Facebook is to basically, if we're going to use OSM data, want to be good collaborators, good partners, we'd like to collaborate back and give back data into OSM. But in the tech way of doing things, the manual way just wasn't one of the options, right? Hiring thousands of people to manually edit. And luckily, we have some really cool engineers that are great in machine learning. And so they started looking at machine learning as a way to possibly generate some of these roads. So this is where it came from, and basically help jumpstart some of the data creation in very remote areas. So some of you guys may have heard of the very first machine learning edits that went into OSM a very long time ago, but a lot has changed since then. And I wanted to share our process. So essentially, this is the full process that we do, and you can see the first one is basically our machine learning predictions. And I'll be showing pictures for these, so it'll be a lot easier to digest. We create training data, and then we use DG satellite imagery, which is the vivid imagery, now also available in OpenStreetMap as a layer, which is nice. There's machine learning magic that happens, and then they post-process it into vectors, and so that it's easy to work with OSM data. Merge it with current OSM data and make sure everything connects well and looks good. And then we go through a lot of human editing before we submit to OSM. And then we also do some post-validation in live OSM. So now to the machine learning. There's basically 2 major things that have happened in the recent past that have helped make this a reality and help make it available, is that deep learning is a big thing. So using artificial neural nets with multiple layers has made it much easier to process satellite imagery and be able to get good results. And the other one is easier access to high-resolution satellite imagery, which before wasn't that easily available to local communities or even companies. I mean, a lot of it, after it was approved by the government to be shared a long time ago, now makes it available, which is now easier to process. It's also not an easy thing to do. As you can imagine, I'm sure you guys are all OSM editors and have seen the different types of imagery. So this is a picture. The first one is from Egypt, India, and Rwanda. And as you can see, satellite image can look really different depending on where the images are taken and what the colors and the textures look like. And so even for expert human mappers, you get to some areas where you can't tell. And having even looked at satellite imagery myself for 4 years, I'm confused of where there's a road or a path, because it starts to look very confusing. Which is why, when we started doing machine learning, we created our own training data. So this is a sample of training data for Thailand. And as you can see, we basically draw out every single road and we cover it. And this is done in Photoshop, so nothing too complicated. But this is how we train our machine learning. So we have the same editors that work on our post-processed data, also create the training data, so really familiar with the area. And we test different types of training data, but now our editors are also really good at picking out different variations of different types of satellite imagery, even within the same area, to make sure that we have a really good handful of images so that when the machine learning's predictions are happening, we get much better results. This is basically the road detection that pops out from the algorithms. And you can see it's just a raster image that's in grayscale, where the brightness indicates the confidence of whether each pixel is a road or not. So it's basically picking up what it thinks is a road. And then we go through a little bit more post-processing. So we apply a really high threshold to make sure we don't get any false positives, and then we extract a centerline. And what that means is you'll see that in satellite imagery, there's usually like a little bit of cloud cover, which we luckily don't have too much of in Fitbit imagery. But things like shadows or bright roofs, which could possibly give us different results. And so we take all of that stuff out to things that we are absolutely confident that are a road. Then we go through more processing where we like trim, connect, and merge. And basically, at this point, we don't merge OSM data, but we use it as a sample to see where there is current OSM data, and then we just delete the machine learning results. And so you're not duplicating any data in OSM. But we also then start going through the low confidence regions and combining. So if you look at the previous region, you see a lot of fragmented roads where it's kind of like taken them out. And then in this one, we start connecting them where we're confident that it might have just been some tree cover or shadows that couldn't see them. And then we remove a lot of the island roads. So if you take a look at the differences, all these little pieces, which most of the times actually are road, but when you're in more rural areas, there's a lot of vegetation, and so you can't actually see where it's connecting to, so it picks up a little piece, but unless we're sure about it, we actually just remove it from the post-processing step. We then convert it to vector data, which we can merge with OSM. This is a screenshot of the same area, but it's within the ID tooling, which we've also brought down from the open database. And in-house basically changed it to work with our process. So it's a smooth transition, but we've added a lot of validation checks that are similar to JOSM into ID editor, which help us catch a lot of it. So you can see in this image, all the green roads are actually roads that were generated from a machine. The white roads are current OSM data. And you'll see some pink-purple roads that are actually machine-generated roads, but already have lint tags on them. And so we use the lint tagging system to make sure that anything that could possibly need more detailed attention does get it. And so you'll see in our next process that we actually go through each individual edit to make sure they're working. We've also downloaded the hot tasking manager, which has been really great for us, just managing the editors and the processes and making sure that we have each level of editing done. And so we have 3 roles for our 20 editors currently, and they get fully trained for each of these roles, and once they're very comfortable and there's a peer review process, they can kind of move to the next step of validating and peer review each other's works, till eventually we know they're good enough to actually make submissions to OSM. And we use the tasking manager with the color system to basically go through that. And so human validation team is 20 people, all from different parts. And that's basically our team. We photoshopped some people in because not everyone was in the same location. The top ones are actually our engineers, and then these are interchangeably called raters and mappers, editors. And so basically our editing process is you'll get the first round of editing that goes through the machine learning data, make sure that everything looks okay. It's set to go through each lint tag, and so they'll check on each lint tag within there and make sure all the connections are there, go through a tagging scheme, and then once that's done and the whole task area is completed, it would move to a validator who will then go and check that work and make sure everything's okay. And we'll do a little bit more validation, and once everyone feels comfortable, and we've had an internal discussion for that area, and there's consistency amongst the thoughts and processes, we'll go ahead with the submission process. And I can show you a little bit later the steps that we're taking to make those submissions. One thing that we take very seriously is the feedback. And so we've set up a really good open feedback mechanism within the team where people feel comfortable to give each other feedback on edits, because we want to make sure that internally we're all agreeing on stuff and we're consistent among mapping, and we're taking local editing schemes into practice, looking at wikis, and it always helps to have another 1 or 2 people check your work, especially when you're dealing with so many edits. So we discuss most of our edits. Every time we get comments on our edits, it's actually a shared group experience, and we talk about it internally in our team. We have meetings once a week where we talk about our progress for the week before, any major challenges we would have had, how we're going to work on it together as a team. And we also have metrics for each of our processes, and this is partly internal to how we work and capture metrics at each point. But the metrics are also really important for us to gather exactly how long we're taking to work on specific edits and any errors we're catching in our validation process within ID Editor to see where that error is coming from. Is it a tooling issue? Is it just local edit merges from that area? Sometimes a lot of the local edits are kind of in different places or mapped differently. So we just want to make sure that we have all of that in place. But also, is it an inconsistency between just the way we're doing it? And so there's a lot of discussion and posting and metrics that we gather that help us capture and get better each time. And you can see that in the quality. Taking that notion of feedback, we've also done the same thing with community. So we've been very open in discussion posts about our process. You can see a full wiki import process where we've even showed you who our users are, what they're doing, what our process looks like. We also have an email on there, ways to contact us. All the Facebook mappers have that they are actually mapping for Facebook within their profile, so you can see they belong to one of us. But we're also available for questions. I've been in OSM for a long time, so there's lots of ways that you can reach us, and email, Twitter, right throughout Facebook, throughout OSM profiles as well. And so we're happy to answer any questions. We try to get them answered as quick as possible. Sometimes we get a lot in at the same time, and it's usually me responding, so it might be a few hours before I get to you. But we try to get to everyone as quick as possible and answer questions. This was a trip that we took to Thailand recently to meet with the Thailand community, because that's where we're mapping. Turns out most of them are actually expats and not local to Thailand, but have done an amazing amount of mapping in Thailand, which is really cool. Met with Tom Leo, and we've known all these people by their username because we've been messaging and communicating long before we even started an import to get an idea of what local mapping communities are like in Thailand. How people are editing, where they're editing, why they're editing, just to get a feel for them. And so it was really nice to meet him in person because our team knows him as his username. And what we found out is that he spends 8 hours of his day doing OSM, which is why we ran into a lot of his edits as we were mapping through Thailand. And what he's showing over there is an Excel sheet that he got with thousands of schools in Thailand that he got from the Thai government. And so he sits and adds them into OSM one at a time, which is amazing. And that's kind of why I think the OSM community is so great, because a lot of people spend their personal time doing really cool things. And so one thing we've made sure to do is always talk with the community, especially when we're mapping. And I know it can be really scary when you see big imports coming in, and it's a scary subject. But we'd like to be as open as possible and talk and see what's going on in the local community. And we have been with Thailand. This is basically how we task up the area. So we've basically taken up the whole country into its regions. And you can see it tasked up. The first image is basically road density. So we pulled up what the road density looked like, just so we can average out like how much time and editing would take place, but also areas where we'd run into more edits. And then on the other side is our import progress. So everything in blue has actually been published into live OSM. And if you look at our wiki page, it tells you what our chain set comments are, and so you can easily figure out which are our edits and take a look at them. If you have any feedback, feel free to tell us, let us know. We pretty much address every single issue or any single question that comes up, whether it's through the OSM profile questions or talk lists. And they've been very valuable. A lot of the feedback, even though it came in a little bit screaming and shouting sometimes, helped us figure out some really important things within our tooling process when we first started a while back, which has been very valuable to us, so we do appreciate that. These are our stats, and you can see the difference in road density just from the editing that we've been doing recently. We've completed 13 of the 79 provinces, completed over 2,000 tasks. We have 76,000 new ways and about 37,000 kilometers of roads. This is since May, and about 1 million nodes. And this is kind of a before and after. So we have a lot more other examples of places where we just added most of the data because there was nothing there. But I thought this was a really good example because if I was a mapper in OSM, and this happens a lot at mapathons I've seen over time, is people kind of skip through this area because it looks like it's mapped out, right? And so getting into the details will be harder, so people will move on to something that either is a little more sparse or zoom in. But you can see the difference within like how much was actually missing with some of the machine learning assisted roads that were added in, which is, I think, kind of cool to see for me. So the other thing that we add in addition to road geometry is the type of road that it is. And we know that because we're doing it remotely, we want to be really careful about adding specific data that we cannot verify on the ground. And we hope and we work with a lot of community members that go through and might check them, and we'll send sample data before we even move to an area to make sure. But the other ways that we infer a road type is from satellite imagery, which in most cases is pretty good, and we can see it. We also study a lot of local edits, so before we even move into an area, we do a lot of research on who are the main users, who are the main editors. We contact them and let them know we'll be mapping in the area. We also have all of our OSM wikis linked into our tooling, and so as mappers are working through different areas, they have quick access to the wikis right through the tooling. And we have our own set of wikis as well for the areas, talking to community. And another thing is population density maps. So some people might be familiar with this, but this is a project that came out of the connectivity labs as well, using satellite imagery to see where people live and basically pulling out houses through satellite imagery. And you get images like this, which kind of help us with road tagging. So if you take a look at this image, a lot of the yellow that you see are basically the buildings that were pulled from this population density. And we get a good scope of whether there's houses there and people. So a lot of the times, this is great in more urban areas where you can see residential roads. And so you already immediately know the classification of road types, which is really easy then to infer for our editors. The other thing is when it's in more remote areas, sometimes because there's so many roads, people neglect to actually map them. It's a lot of work. But using population density, we know it's leading to, even if it's 5 houses, we know that it's leading to those houses. And so we're not missing people that way in our road editing. And we try to make sure we get that in. And this is an open data set that's available on the season website. So you can use it for any type of data. It's actually a lot of research, and Humanitarian OpenStreetMap has been using it recently to even know where to task out areas. So when they're working on humanitarian projects, the population density maps can tell you where you're reaching the most people, and it helps you map and find places to map much faster. The other thing we're experimenting, and we have not put into OSM yet, and we're looking for ways and to understand this better and work with the community, is extraction of road names. Facebook has access to a ton of people and can crowdsource really amazing. And we did a test in Thailand a couple of months ago just to see how many and if this could work. And we crowdsourced to Thailand users to get road data because we have a lot of places. So every time somebody checks in or creates a page for their business, that's place data that we have in Facebook. And so we can kind of get a good idea when people check in or there's different points of interest along a road, what that road name is, because users from that country are actually putting this data in. And so we can crowdsource in a much more efficient way. So basically in this example, we know two different places. And then we can send a user crowdsourcing ping onto their app to basically say, is this the correct road? And we can get a high confidence for what that road name might be. And just from the sample testing that we did, we gathered 66,000 road names that are not in OSM currently. So it's a pretty big number. And right now we're focusing on road extraction and make sure we actually get the roads in. But I think it could be very valuable to look at road names because that would be the next thing. So if you have any ideas of how this could work, please come and talk to me. The other thing is quality analysis, and this has been a really, really, really big push for our team in the last couple of months, is focusing on quality and making sure that the geometry that's going in looks great. None of it looks like bought roads, if you've seen any of the data that we've done in the last few months, but they have great curves, and they connect in the right places. But there's always little things that sometimes you just don't catch, right? And that's common for all mappers. And so we've done a lot of things to make sure that we catch those different, whether we inherit those errors or whether they're from kind of the mapping that we do. And a lot of the times they're not actually errors because our system won't let it push up. There are certain things like angles or kind of overlaps for some reason that we'll capture with local data. So we've customized ID editor, as we've said, to capture a lot of these different areas that we would normally catch in JOSM. We've also used JOSM and have custom paint styles that match exactly what we do in ID editor just to verify and do things at a larger scale if we need to. It was a great talk about using OSM char. We also use that, and then Osmos and Keep Right. It's a lot of work. We have one person specifically who's on QA that's been working in OSM for a really long time that his full-time job is just looking through the data that we've added. This is also something we capture metrics on. So we produce daily reports on all the edits that we're doing, and the first thing that our mappers do the next morning is basically go through them and make sure that they're all fixed and the data quality looks really good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about things that we've seen as successes in the last few months and some things that we found a little bit hard to work with. On the successes side, technology, machine learning has produced amazing results. And we can get almost close to 100% of the roads within a certain task, very accurate to the satellite imagery. Which makes it a lot easier on our editors to go through, and at that point we're just cleaning up and making sure everything looks good. Our road geometry looks a lot better than our very first import last year, and most of those edits are actually not in OSM anymore. But they look really good with nice curves, and they connect at the right places. Overall, we've changed the process a lot, so we've tooled a lot of what used to be very manual, and we have a very efficient process, and it's a constant loop of feedback between our processes to make sure that we keep getting better each time. We focus a lot on community engagement, and this is why we're at State of the Map, but also meeting with local community. We're completely always open to feedback. And the other thing that was having new imagery in OSM has been really helpful, because now our editors and the community are seeing the same imagery, and makes it a lot easier for us to move forward. One of the challenges has been understanding like the import process. Even though I've been in OSM for a long time, there's multiple wikis to tell you how to do things, and sometimes they're not always the same. The import we're doing is also very new to OSM, and we understand that comes with, it's a little scary for everyone, but there's no actual wiki defining how it's done. And so that's been a little bit challenging, trying to figure out like what the rules are and when we can import and when we cannot. But I think so far it's been okay, but I would hope as a community that we can work on that together. If you have ideas, I'm happy to support this in any way we can. The other thing that we've seen is the lag time between our editing and submission. Because we're obviously in a corporation, things will move like at a certain pace, and so we have 20 mappers that are ready to edit once we've made a machine learning, which happens in 3 or 4 days, and we have now a bunch of edits. But sometimes waiting on the yes or no light from the community means we're stuck for 3 weeks until we have kind of a sense of whether we can move forward. And that's been a little bit tough in the last couple kind of months to move forward at a kind of a reasonable pace. And so what we've done is like re-edited our work, just because there's obviously changes that happen in local. So even if we edit it and we don't submit it, a few days later that's out of date because someone could have gone in and edited a road or changed it, which is the cool part of OSM. But on our end, it means we have to go through and re-edit it. So hopefully we get to a point where we're closer in time, and now we kind of just wait on whether we can move forward before we even start editing. The other thing that we had questions on was, what do we do when there's no local community? And I think this is a common question for a lot of people, and I've been hearing it a lot, is it okay to go through and make these edits? And then how do we set up these local communities? And if you guys have ideas, I'd love to hear it. So it's a couple of things on my mind. And I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of some of the road masks. So these are just different areas. And these are just pure road masks. They've not been edited. It's exactly what the machine pops out. There's a lot more post-processing that happens. Cool. So I kind of wrap this up in a few minutes. But if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
一番右側真ん中の
Hello. So I'm somewhat new to OSM, so I'm probably not familiar with all the work Facebook has been doing. But could you talk about which regions have you been most active in? I know you talked about that you started doing or are in process of doing Thailand, maybe other places, some more light. And one separate question from that is, so you answered one of the questions that was in my mind about road types. What about one-ways and turn restrictions? Like, do you do that as well?
Yeah, great questions. So the first one is we're focusing on Thailand because we started in Thailand and we wanted to make sure we go through one country at a time, and so we can focus all of our efforts. The next few countries on our roadmap was Indonesia, Malaysia, and so we also traveled to Indonesia recently to meet with the local community and get a feel for what's happening. So those are the next countries on our roadmap for now. And then to answer your next question, we don't add any of the telemetry data or road restrictions because it's not something we can verify from satellite imagery. And this is where we really would like to work more with the community because we can put the initial road structure down and basically fill up the map, but on the ground we'd hope that that data gets filled in more accurately.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I'm a little bit more interested in the machine learning and the post-processing part. Is it possible you can share more details like the precision recall from your model and post-processing? And the second question is like, how large is your training data set? Because it looks like you need to label a lot on there. And is this data set publicly available? And the third question is about your machine learning model. Is that open source? Thanks.
Okay, great. That's a lot of questions. If I forget one, I might ask you again. So the first one is precision recall. I think we've reached close to 68, 70% from where we were. So we do keep capturing that on that. The training data sets used to be pretty large when we started. So each tile is about 10 by 10 kilometers, and we'd use about 25 of those tiles. But over time, we've done more localized training data sets, and so within a specific region, we only need 5. And so essentially, we can finish our training data for a few regions in a day or so without 20 editors. Because the machine learning model is very good, especially in Thailand. When we move to new areas that are not that different, we'll just add a variation of whatever type that is. So if we're moving into high density area, we'll just need 1 or 2 tiles that are high density. And then the third one is whether we open source it. The tooling is currently in the process of being open sourced. The machine learning is not right now. Yeah.
Hi. So I'm going to refer to OpenStreetMap, which you probably understand is quite confusing who OpenStreetMap is, and that's fluffy, so disclaimer there. But companies are obviously well defined, and there's a few like Mapbox and Telenav and yourselves that are doing editing of OpenStreetMap in quite, 20 people, 20 staff is a reasonable team size. And you're doing it a bit different to the other companies. So I wonder if you think OpenStreetMap should be doing this themselves, or are there things that kind of essential OpenStreetMap should be doing instead of the companies individually doing? Cool.
That's a really good question. It might be a bit of a loaded question. So I'm going to answer to my best ability. I think what I've seen is like an OpenStreetMap, and then there's like humanitarian mappers, and then there's corporate mappers, which seems to be a division. I never considered myself not being an OpenStreetMap member. I am OpenStreetMap. I've worked on it for a couple of years, maybe in different fields, but I don't think that corporations also want to feel like they're corporations. A lot of the times we get into these discussions, even on talk posts, where it's like an attack or like a message at Facebook. But sitting behind that email is me, and I've been in OpenStreetMap for many years and have trained hundreds of people personally to use OpenStreetMap. So I think corporations are part of that community and can bring a valuable resource. And we've seen like great things from Mapbox and how they've come in and created tooling that is now available to everybody and has become part of that OpenStreetMap community. And personally, I hope that's where the future of OpenStreetMap goes, is because I think you do need all of these different pieces as we move forward, because there's such a big gap of data in OSM that even if we all like individually do it, we're not going to finish it. So it will require all these different pieces of OpenStreetMap to kind of bring different tooling aspects and resources and knowledge and people together. So I think everyone is OpenStreetMap, and I think everyone had a space. I'd love for more communication and open communication. So when there are like disagreements or misunderstandings, and sometimes, Facebook did make a mistake. Our very first edits weren't that great, and I think it was just a misunderstanding of how the community worked. And I know that's on a lot of people's minds. But the intentions were good, and I think that's across the board for anyone who does come into OpenStreetMap, is that we have to assume good intentions, like Martijn said, and there's going to be mistakes from any user. And the key is that if people are willing to listen and respond, I think that's what makes a really good community. And so, yeah, I think going forward, it would be valuable to have all these different pieces.
It may have more question.
For your training data sets, have you looked at doing that directly in OSM itself and then taking OSM as the training data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we definitely did look at that option, and I think it was used. We didn't get the exact precision and recall that we were looking for, and it's partly because there isn't a perfect model for OSM because it's so localized. So each time you go to a new area, it's going to be very different. And it's more about capturing like what type of imagery versus the data in the machine learning process. So being able to understand the different coloring and the width and the texture of that specific image to be able to get the data versus just having a road, which is what we would get from OSM. Good question.
Thank you very much. You may have more questions, but we already have tea time.
Perfect.
Coffee time. So if you have discussion, please gather in front of the sponsor booth and take a coffee and discussion.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Next session will start at 11:30.